Today we're going to continue our video series on the players. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the now all too silent media, and more specifically, taxpayer-funded Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, known in Canada as the CBC. This is basically the fake news of the Government of Canada, in my humble opinion. Now, even though this is a Canadian news broadcaster, there are issues that are going to be discussed here that definitely apply to the U.S. rail industry. And as I mentioned, some of the players in this particular video who also play a role in the U.S. rail industry, or have played a rather large role in the U.S. rail industry. All right, what you have here are three snippets from a CBC article. And again, the CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It is an arm of the Government of Canada. It's media propaganda arm. So there's a name here that I want you to notice for this article here that was written. And look at the arrow that's perpendicular here in the first snippet, and it shows the name Dave Seglins. There's also John Nickel that was part of this article, but the one I want you to focus on is Dave Seglin. He is one of the people who is most known in Canada for investigating rail disasters, etc., and doing reports on the rail industry and how dangerous it is, etc. Well, this article here was entitled "The Transportation Safety Board Says CN Rail Failed to Report Hundreds of Derailments, Collisions." And this article was, let's see, published in December of 2013, which was right after the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, and well before I had started my investigation into that death. I had really started investigating Jason's death in 2018. So, you know, this was 5 years earlier. And if you look here, it says that a continuing CBC News investigation into rail safety has found that Canada's largest freight carrier, CN Rail, did not report to authorities more than 1,800 derailments and incidents, including 44 on key rail arteries. This came to light in 2005 when the Transportation Safety Board's Director of Rail Investigations says he became suspicious of a dramatic difference between CN's accident numbers compared to other operators. Transportation Safety Board says CN failed to report hundreds of derailments, collisions. The Safety Watchdog Agency took an unprecedented step and issued a statutory summons in June of 2006 to CN Rail requiring it to turn over its complete safety records. The TSB found unreported over a 6-year period 1,700 non-main track derailments, 44 main track derailments, 1 main track collision, 64 non-main track collisions, 1 fire/explosion, 1 crossing accident, 32 other accidents. And again, this was over a period of 6 years. And I believe this ended up being about 40%, close to 40% of all incidents at CN Rail that had not been reported. I'd have to check the math on that, but I believe I had done previously the math looking at total incidents over that period versus what had not been reported, and it came out to just around 40%. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I do seem to remember. There's another thing that was going on in 2013, and that was the Lac-Mégantic train disaster, which happened on July 6th, 2013. So about 5 months prior to this article coming out that CN Rail had failed to report all of its incidents. The Lac-Mégantic train disaster killed 47 people when a Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway train became a runaway train. The Lac-Mégantic train had crude oil on it, and it when after becoming a runaway train, it derailed and exploded right in the town of Lac-Mégantic. There was a single crew member on that train, and so after a long trip, the engineer, after applying the brakes in the engine, was the one who would also have to apply the handbrakes on the train in order to secure it. And he supposedly had not applied enough handbrakes to secure the train. Now, here's the issue I have with this, folks. If you look here at the little red arrow on the CBC News article, it says, authorities first noticed discrepancies in 2005. But this investigation resulted in a report in December, at the end of December 2013. Why would it take 8 years to analyze this information? I'm sorry, folks, but I don't believe it. I think that this was simply a diversion by Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board to take the eyes of the public off of them right after the Lac-Mégantic train disaster. Because, people may be looking into what are procedures and what are the regulations and the laws that applied, and what if Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board had been turning a blind eye to a whole lot of laws and violations of laws. It doesn't take 8 years to do a simple analysis looking at statistics, how many trains, how many incidents were there, how many did you not report. It does not take 8 years. If it does, Dave Seglins, you need to be fired, or other people at CBC. Because even I could do it faster than that. And I've gone through a lot more information, I suspect, than what this investigation would have required. So I don't buy it. I think this was a distraction on the part of regulators in order not to have people looking at what was really happening in the rail industry in Canada and all the violations of laws. Not just perhaps by Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway, but, you start looking into these issues, you may see CN and CP were violating the law, along with their rail partners in crime at the Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, and the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada. So, the more eyes you have looking at something, and if you had 47 people killed, you would have had a lot of eyes looking into these issues when Lac-Mégantic happened. And, taxpayers in Canada, I hate to say it, but a lot of them are so gullible. They so trust the government of Canada. And so we're going to have our propaganda arm go out and do this investigation and put this out as a great way to take the heat off the Transportation Safety Board and Transport Canada in its complete and utter failures when it comes to rail worker safety and safety actions taken and garbage investigations by the Transportation Safety Board, and on and on and on. And one of those garbage investigations and safety actions taken would have dated back to the Mackyard incident of 2007, which clearly showed Transport Canada was turning a blind eye to fake qualifications in the rail industry. And we're going to get into a whole lot more when it comes to that. But CBC, I don't trust them any further than I can throw them. And I have my reasons for that. All right, this states the first TSB discussions on CN reporting took place in September of 2005. But again, it would take 8 years for this report to come out. I don't buy it. Nash told CBC News he was not happy at all with someone from industry telling me what should be reported and what should not be reported. So Nash must have been one of the regulators at the Transportation Safety Board. And then it goes on and it says, Ed Harris, CN's Executive Vice President of Operations, responded by saying Transportation Safety Board's reporting criterion was subjective. It did not demand all derailments be reported, only those that sustain damage that affects rail operation. He encouraged the Transportation Safety Board to begin work revising its reporting regulations. Well, first of all, reporting regulations, that's not the job of the Transportation Safety Board. That would be the job of Transport Canada as far as determining what needs to be reported, in my humble opinion. What would, Transport Canada's acts and regulations have to say about this? Forget the Transportation Safety Board. This would fall under Transport Canada, in my humble opinion. And so the thing is, if you look at this, folks, there's several things you should be questioning. Why the 8-year span? I think it was for Transport Canada and Transportation Safety Board to take a whole lot of eyes off of them. And then why would you have Ed Harris at CN Rail? And, hey, you're a VP of operations, an executive vice president of operations. Why are you fine with not reporting everything? And you're going to see that Ed Harris moved around and would end up in the U.S. rail industry at CSX. So again, in a key role. And so you have to ask yourself, the guy kind of has a lot of nerve, in my opinion, saying, oh, it's okay not to report derailments, whatever, collisions, And I'm here to tell you, folks, when it comes to CN, in my opinion, things haven't changed. In addition to any requirements that would exist for Transport Canada, necessitating the reporting of rail incidents to Transport Canada, there's also other regulation in Canada. For example, the rail safety management systems. Those laws date back to 2001. And Transport Canada has had a very challenging time having rail carriers in Canada comply with those laws. I believe those laws have provisions for record keeping also. And so there's certainly a lot of laws that, if the proper procedures aren't in place at CN Rail, maybe Mr. Executive VP of Operations, who may not have had proper safety management systems in place, didn't realize that he had reporting requirements imposed by the Government of Canada. So these are all issues that would need to be looked at. But, I have a big problem with rail executives who say, we don't need to report this or that. And it's basically a free-for-all. That's what it's been in Canada, folks, in my opinion, with Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board turning a blind eye to so much, or giving us garbage investigations and garbage safety actions taken, as you're going to see as we go through a whole lot more videos that I plan on providing. So Ed Harris, again, would become a player in the U.S. rail industry. Are these the types of players that you really want infesting the U.S. rail industry? This article taken from a CN website pertaining to the naming of Ed Harris as Chief Operations Officer in 2022. It also shows at the bottom here that Mr. Harris had over 40 years in the rail industry. What an expert, in my humble opinion. Working at Illinois Central and CN, and including Executive Vice President of Operations until 2007. Prior to joining CN in his consulting capacity, Mr. Harris served as Executive Vice President of Operations at CSX from 2018 to 2020. He also previously served as Chief Operations Officer for Canadian Pacific Railway from 2010 to 2012. And so again, folks, you may think there's just a problem at CN Rail when it comes to issues, but these players move around, not only from one company to another, but from one country to another. And so I cannot emphasize enough, if you are a rail worker, be that in Canada or the US, if you are a rail customer, a rail investor, a taxpayer, a member of the public, and you have an issue or an interest in rail issues, you need to look at the information being posted both on the YouTube channel for the UP and S merger and on the channel for railfamiliesunited.com. And don't assume that because something seems to pertain only to Canada, like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that the information there does not apply to the U.S. rail industry, because as you can see, it most certainly does. Now, in this article, again by CBC's Dave Seglins, this one was in 2014, April 2014. And again, this is not even a year yet for the Lac-Mégantic train disaster, which was still very much being investigated and on the minds of people in Canada. And so, all these investigations by Dave Seglins from the CBC, Canada's propaganda arm as far as the Canadian government, were now coming out. And here, in this one, in early 2014, we're being told that the Transportation Safety Board discovers companies are not reporting all derailments. And now they're saying they find that more than 100 incidents that weren't reported by CP, MMNA, which was the train company involved in the Lac-Mégantic derailment, and CN. And the fact that they included MMNA here, to me, only further solidifies that this was a distraction from that Lac-Mégantic investigation. It says here, CP Rail reveals 150 occurrences. It says the Transportation Safety Board grew concerned about CP Rail in early 2013. Oh, now we're on top of it. Just before the Lac-Mégantic disaster, we were looking into these issues of bad reporting and bad things being done by rail carriers. Not at Transport Canada or the Transportation Safety Board, though. We're above the board, right? Wrong. Anyways, it says Transportation Safety Board grew concerned about CP Rail in early 2013 after noting the company changed how it was reporting accidents. Okay, well, 2013. If you look at the block here above my head, early 2013. What happened in early 2013? That's when Keith Creel, former CN Rail Chief Operations Officer, became CP Rail Chief Operations Officer in February of 2013. But that's just all coincidence, of course. Note that Keith Creel was also CN Rail Chief Operations Officer during that rather nasty Mac Yard incident of 2007, which clearly showed fake qualifications of frontline rail workers and violations of the Railway Safety Act, specifically Section 20, in addition to other laws that were being violated during Keith Creel's stint as Chief Operations Officer at CN Rail. And we're going to get into all of that in other videos, but early 2013, now the Transportation Safety Board is concerned. The fact that that's when Keith Creel took over at CP Rail as Chief Operations Officer, let me say that I'm not surprised to see issues surfacing. Just my humble opinion. Okay, again, that whole let us take the heat off of Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board by doing what appears to be a throwing under the bus of some of our rail partners in crime, in my opinion, happened again after a very nasty derailment in Field, BC on February 4th of 2019. So, shortly after that, as people are again starting to focus on all of this and the investigation and maybe, starting to look at what's going on in the rail industry, great way for Transport Canada to take the heat off of itself, and same with the Transportation Safety Board, would be to have Dave Seglin's write, in my opinion, another article on problems in the rail industry. This time, it was an article by Dave Seglins and Joseph Lero, can't pronounce the last name, but anyways, and it was done for the Fifth Estate, which is kind of like a 60 Minutes. It's also part of the CBC. It's one of their programs. So very much part of the government propaganda arm at the Government of Canada. So this article stated, police officer suspects internal cover-up by CP Rail in fatal BC mountain crash. That horrible derailment, folks, took the lives of all 3 crew members: the locomotive engineer, the conductor, and the conductor trainee. And if you look here at the snippet below, this article was written first in January of 2020, so less than a year after that nasty derailment, when, people are waiting for this investigation report to come out. So we got to put something out there to divert the public's attention, right? Because we're going to be coming out with our report at Transportation Safety Board, and well, we want to make it known that it looked like the CP Rail police officer investigating this derailment, because they have rail police for each company, CN Rail Police and CP Rail Police, and it's their jurisdiction to investigate rail accidents. The fox in charge of the chicken coop, right? So this one police officer for CP Rail ended up leaving, and he told Fifth Estate that I was ordered to stop investigating the February 4th, 2019 crash. I would say it was some type of cover-up. He says how he was also being told not to interview witnesses, etc. And in my opinion, that's a pattern, not just at CP, but at CN Rail. And I discussed this, I believe, in the brainwashing series pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, because CN, after conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed, People that would have been witnesses for the Transportation Safety Board, like newly qualified conductors or conductor trainees who worked in the area and would have known or known of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, 19 of them were fired in one day. During the middle of a grain crisis in Canada, when farmers could not get their grain to market because there didn't seem to be enough trains and resources to move the grain. Why would CN Rail be firing all these employees when they need them to help move grain? Farmers lost, I think, $8 billion that year. But you know, if you get rid of people that would have known or known of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, there's a few less witnesses for the Transportation Safety Board or Transport Canada to speak to, right? I knew one of the 19 who was fired right around that time. And he was the one who told me the word in the field was he was a newly qualified conductor. And he was the one who had told me the word in the field was that conductor trainee Jason Clooney was being qualified the day he was killed, in spite of the fact that that man had 0 yard training. So, it's a great way to get rid of witnesses, right? Just fire them, bring in a new bunch. Pretend you guys are just not, you're not for this industry. You're not made for it. It's too hard. We're going to get rid of 19 of you in the middle of a grain crisis. There should be a lot of red flags going up when it comes to these issues, especially when we now see in this derailment under Keith Creel, who came from CN Rail. He wasn't there at the time of the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. He had already moved on. But in my opinion, the practices were certainly there when it came to fake qualifications at CN Rail, because those practices dated back to at least 2007, which is when Keith Creel became Chief Operations Officer at CN Rail. And so would I be surprised to see a getting rid of witnesses or a silencing of witnesses in rail incidents? In my humble opinion, absolutely not. That's just my humble opinion. You're free to form your own. But anyways, so I'm just going to read what's on the bottom here. Keith Creel was CEO at CP as of January 2017. Again, this derailment happened in February of 2019. That's when the horrific BC train derailment, which killed all 3 crew members, happened. A note found in one of the engines, by the way, had been written by the locomotive engineer who was killed. I believe it was the day earlier he had written this note, complaining about maintenance issues or something to that effect. The train had sat there for hours in mountainous terrain in extreme cold, and it was still expected to be moved by this crew. Turns out, because it sat there in cold, it lost its air pressure, and so the braking system failed, and the train in mountainous terrain steadily increased in speed and finally derailed. I think the speed there was maybe, 20 miles. I can't remember, but it was not that high. It was, I think, something like 20 miles per hour or something. I think the train derailed, it might have been kilometers, derailed at 56. And as the crew, it derailed as the crew in a nearby bunkhouse. Okay, there's bunkhouses where train crews stay when they're out of their assigned terminal. And so there was an entire bunkhouse basically listening in to these horrific radio communications that led up to the deaths of all 3 crew members. So if I believe that's what I had read in one of the reports. If Transport Canada the Transportation Safety Board and the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada had provided appropriate death cover-ups in the past for those in the Canadian rail industry, as they had done in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Surely they could be expected by rail executives like Keith Creel to do so again. And not just Keith Creel, I would say, Ed Harris, anybody who worked in operations, and I would say dating back at least to 2007, at CN Rail for sure, and then I would say later clearly at CP. Well, if you had appropriate death cover-ups and cover-ups of rail incidents and violations of so many laws by your rail partners in crime at the Transportation Safety Board and Transport Canada, who provided garbage investigations and garbage investigation reports for the public, well, couldn't you be expected to have your rail partners in crime continue to provide those things for you as a rail executive? Because surely, they couldn't expose you as doing anything wrong in the rail industry as a rail executive, because in order to expose you, they would be exposing themselves, would they not? Absolutely. In my humble opinion, there is no denying that. That is how bad things have gotten in the Canadian rail industry. And again, folks, all of these players a lot of them have now infiltrated the U.S. rail industry because Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board both decided to be rail partners in crime. And I would add the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada too. They all decided to be rail partners in crime rather than regulators and oversight bodies that were supposed to be there to protect frontline rail workers. Okay, before we move on here from this article, which I think was a diversion from the Lac Mégantic derailment investigation and the upcoming report that was going to be released to the public, I added here on the bottom with the green arrows, this is another snippet from this same report by Dave Seglins and this other guy, Joseph Lero, for Fifth Estate, pertaining to the supposed cover-up at CP in the BC Field BC derailment that killed 3 employees. So if you look at the green arrows on the bottom, you can see it's from the same CBC article, and then you can see the quote here from the former CP police officer who ended up leaving the company over this. He says, I was ordered to stop investigating, saying his superiors prevented him from obtaining key witness accounts. I would say it was some type of cover-up. And then he says, I believe it's an injustice. I do believe that there was corporate influence to sway the aspect of the investigation in some capacity. Corporate influence. Who would that have been? CP's legal team? CP's chief executive officer? Who would that have been trying to sway the case? I have my suspicions. I'm going to leave it at that. But if you look over my head here also, I did look up the actual speed for this derailment. The authorized speed was 20 miles per hour or 32 kilometers per hour in that area. 20 miles per hour is not too fast. The train increased in speed in this mountainous region and derailed at 53 miles per hour or 85 kilometers per hour. 2 of the crew jumped, the locomotive engineer and the conductor trainee. The conductor stayed in the locomotive and went over this massive precipice. And, all these other rail cars went on top, on top, on top. A horrific disaster that killed 3 rail employees. And the family members, I think, are still fighting this to this day. I'm not sure on that, but, you know, if the police officer investigating this suspected a cover-up, in my opinion, he was probably right. Those of us who study rail industry have certainly come across reports by the Transportation Safety Board or Transport Canada that would attempt to tell us that rail incidents really have gone down. Well, have they? Or might even fewer be getting reported to supposed regulators, rail partners in crime, at the Transportation Safety Board and Transport Canada, who have been all too willing to turn a blind eye to far too much for far too long. Now, I'm going to tell you about my very personal 2025 rail incident at CN Rail. Of course, not reported. My own child was involved in a derailment in 2025. It was not reported to Transport Canada or the Transportation Safety Board. I waited to see if the Transportation Safety Board would assign an incident number to this derailment. There was none. 3 rail cars derailed. I believe my child said the 4th would have been a dangerous goods rail car. Now here's the issue. There was a hot box that had been gone over shortly before the derailment. The hot box malfunctioned for some reason and did not catch the fact that a bearing was overheating, and that's what ultimately caused the derailment. It happened at a crossing. Took out the switch, the signal, some track, whatever. Happened in a town. But yet it was not reported. So, have rail incidents really gone down? Or are rail partners in crime just better at hiding all of this? Because, hey, if it happens in the middle of the night, nobody's around, we can clean this up. Happens in a remote location, we can clean this up. What if dangerous goods fall into a river? Oh, that's okay, we can clean it up. There's nobody around and it's the middle of the night. Is that what's going on in the rail industry? I have my suspicions. But again, these are all issues of public safety, rail worker safety, rail investor. Rail investors would have huge issues with this. Rail customers, and of course, there's the implications of financial fraud. Because when you try and pretend that your company is so much better, so much safer than it really is, if rail investors knew what I knew, would they be investing in these companies? Would they be investing in the government of Canada and its financial instruments if they knew what I knew? Because financial fraud, yeah, it could be by the rail partners in crime who are rail executives, but it's also financial fraud on the part of the government of Canada, in my humble opinion, because it's rail regulators, supposed regulators and oversight bodies, are rail partners in crime. And there is simply no denying that when you look at my dissection of a rail worker death investigation in matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney and all of the other issues that fit into that death, dating back to the Mackyard 2007 incident and the supposed overhaul of frontline rail worker training programs that was supposed to happen because of that incident, which was referred to in Jason Clooney's accident report when that young man was killed. And that's why I went back and looked at all of that information. So all of this stuff is all intertwined. What you have here, folks, is a screen print from the Transportation Safety Board, their website pertaining to active investigations. And I also looked at the ones that are completed, and my child's derailment was not there. And this covers about an 8-month period here, and my child's derailment happened during this period. And so, why is it not here? 3 cars derailed. happened in a town at a crossing. I know exactly where it happened. I know the date on which it happened. It is not on this list. So, Transport Canada, how come you're not having derailments properly reported? And when it comes to the issue of the hot box that did not work properly and failed to catch an overheating bearing in this case, there's implications when it comes to forest fires. Trains, when there's overheating bearings, they start releasing sparks. And this year has certainly been a year of forest fires in Western Canada. So there's implications for that. But there's also implications for proper track maintenance and the proper functioning of critical technology that is supposed to be there to help keep trains on tracks. Minister of Transportation Chrystia Freeland, who is now hurrying to rewrite those railway employee qualification standards for training programs for frontline rail workers. The track maintenance unions have asked you to include track workers as a critical role for training in your new regulation, but you're refusing to do that. Why? Should hot boxes not be properly maintained? Should track equipment not be properly maintained? It's not just put down some rails and that's the end of it. There's a lot more to track maintenance than just the track. There's the switches and there's also hot boxes. So if track maintenance folks are begging to be included in the new regulation for proper training, and we're going to get into all of those issues. Well, Minister of Transportation Chrystia Freeland, Ms. Rail Partner in Crime, in my humble opinion, since you've known of these, fake qualifications and death cover-up issues for at least 6 years. And folks, you will want to look at my video specifically on the player, Chrystia Freeland, because there's a lot of good information in that video too. There's a reason that person is now the Minister of Transportation in Canada. That's no coincidence, folks. Not in my humble opinion. But anyways, as all of this regulation and these training programs are being rewritten, if you are a rail worker, a rail union, a rail customer, a rail investor, a member of the public, I would urge you, write to Minister of Transportation Chrystia Freeland and tell her track maintenance needs to be included in the rewrite of this regulation so that there are proper training programs in place also for track maintenance. They're asking for it, give it to them. All right, we diverted a little bit, but I'm going to get back here to the CBC, the Government of Canada's propaganda arm, and specifically Dave Seglins. This was an email I received from Dave Seglins when we were exchanging emails, and in it, this email, you can see the date here, it was sent to me on May 8th of 2020, which was about 4 months after he did his Fifth Estate report with that other reporter on the Field BC derailment and the potential cover-up that was going on there. So I would ask, like in here he states, please know that I am also researching and preparing some stories on many deaths on Canada's railways in hopes of exposing the huge gaps in investigations and enforcement of criminal code when it comes to the potential negligence by railways. And then he says, I won't rely on any of the materials you've sent other than to read it and be aware of the issues you are raising. Okay, there's a lot of issues with that. And I need to address all of this for taxpayers and people in the rail industry. Um, he's been working on these rail deaths investigations for years now. It's been, let's see, at least 5 years. Where are your investigation reports, Mr. Seglins? Doesn't take that long for a person at the CBC, who's got you could have a whole team of other workers with you. I'm one person. And I could do a pretty decent investigation, very thorough investigation of a whole lot of issues in 4 solid years. You've had 5 years. And I'm sure you have other players that help you and that you're well funded by the government of Canada if they were really interested in doing this investigation. But, I have to wonder, is this investigation really going to come? And the other issue I have here is that when he says at the bottom, I won't rely on the materials you've sent me. Well, that's a Government of Canada employee saying, I'm not going to rely on your stuff. I won't expose it, because I'd be exposing Transport Canada, the Transportation Safety Board, and the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada. Would I not? And we certainly don't want to go there and bite the hand that feeds you. You're an employee of the Government of Canada through CBC. And there was also the other issue, and I exchanged several texts with Dave Seglins on this, as to who would own my files, because I thought I had read something that if you give something to CBC, they own it. Well, buddy, if you think that CBC or the Government of Canada is going to own my files, he was saying that he wanted to talk to me about doing an investigation report and putting something out on that. And I'm like, put on the brakes, bud, because I want to know if CBC is going to own my files. In other words, the Government of Canada. Because what could happen is then I could do a 2-minute snippet. You own the files I gave you. You could choose what to put out there, do a 2-minute report, a short article, in the news, and then nothing else. And it's all swept under the carpet and you own the copyrights. Buddy, there is no way that was going to happen. And I told him there is no way that I will give ownership of my files to CBC or the Government of Canada. And after that text, boy, everything went silent. I don't think I ever heard. I might have asked him one other time about when he was going to do this, but he was really busy and everything went silent as far as our communications. And I suspect that's because he knew that I'm no fool. And there is no way that I was going to allow CBC or the Government of Canada to sweep all of these issues under the carpet. So, Mr. Seglins and CBC, where's this investigation into many, many deaths on Canada's railways? Was that supposed to be the 3 deaths of Field BC that you were still investigating? It didn't sound to me like that was what this was supposed to be. That would have been 3 deaths. Many, many deaths on Canada's railways. That's a plural there. That would have been more than one railway. CP and the field derailment was only one railway. So where are your investigation reports that you were supposed to be doing and putting out? That's my question for you, Mr. Seglins. On this slide, if you look at the very top here, it says these are emails from Dave Seglins. And you could see at the very bottom there where he had responded to an email called Rail Woes, Fake Qualifications, and Death Cover-Ups, where I had asked him to confirm that he had received that email. And he did confirm he received it. This was his response. And there were attachments. Dave Seglins received several emails from me, as you will see. But when we were discussing my files pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, and that and another death, that's when things went silent, when I told him that I would not allow CBC to have ownership of my intellectual property. There was just No way that was going to happen. And when I would outright ask him in text, will CBC own my files? I would get a response like, well, we wouldn't put out anything you don't give us permission to put out. Well, you're not answering the question, are you? You're clearly avoiding it. And yeah, even if I gave you permission to expose the entire thing, you could choose to expose 2 minutes of the entire thing, own the copyrights to my files, and then sweep it all under the carpet. And there was no way that was going to happen. So again, I'm no fool, and Dave Seglins absolutely knew it. Okay, if you look at the top arrow on the top right there, it shows the emails that I pulled up in my email account. And these are emails that went to Dave Seglins. And the fact that he was responding to some of my others clearly shows he was getting them. But anyways, these ones went to Dave Seglins, and they had, a lot of them have attachments to them. There's some emails I blanked out because they had to do with other scandals that the government of Canada was hiding, because CBC, as the taxpayer-funded news agency, should have been interested in those scandals too, right? You'd think. Especially since they impacted U.S. national security and Canadian national security, and again, exposed a whole lot of wrongdoing within the government of Canada. But again, turn a blind eye to everything, right? CBC, that's CBC. If you look at the arrow here, I also point to one called More Rail Woes, Disappearing Statements. That has to do with when there's an incident in the rail industry, a rail worker will get a notice to appear. It's also called a statement. And they have to show up and give their part, their side of the story, along with their union rep. And there's also a management employee in the room when they do that, and everything's recorded, da 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 da. And there's specific rules that are tied to statements, that everybody who's involved is supposed to get the statement. And there's a very interesting procedure where if the statement isn't addressed within a certain period of time, I think it's 28 days, may have changed, but when I knew from my one child's statement it was 28 days. If it's not addressed during that time frame, the whole issue just disappears. And when you get a statement, you can get demerits. And when you get 60 demerits, you can be fired. So, there's a way for the company not to address issues they don't want to address. I'll just wait and pretend I couldn't get to this statement, this issue. The statement disappears, you get no demerits. The rail workers are happy, they get no derailments, but critical safety issues can be totally swept under the carpet by the simple passage of time. So there's a lot of issues we're going to get into when it comes to union issues, etc. Haven't done those videos yet, but they're coming. These issues have also been documented. So again, this is another page of more emails that went to Dave Seglins. And you can see he got the file so much so wrong. And that he might have gotten all 3 files. There's a part 1, 2, 3 on that. So he might have gotten all 3 of those. Then there was one where rail woes. It just keeps getting uglier. There's one where I talked about another CN rail worker that was killed. On and on it goes. So Dave Seglins, he received a whole lot of information from me and had more than enough information to prove that Transport Canada, the Transportation Safety Board, and the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada were, in my opinion, all rail partners in crime. And again, more emails to Dave Seglins, a lot of them with attachments again. And you can see where the red arrow is there, where I say that the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada sat on some of my files for over a year and a half. When I was requesting all this information tied to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney and training programs on file with Transport Canada, and on and on and on. They refused to provide me with what should have been disclosed within 30 days. In some cases, as I've shown in other places, I think in my brainwashing series, um, there's one document I provide where I was told that they just put my files, on the shelf. They didn't even tell me that they had done that. And I would have to keep fighting with them for months and months and literally years. And they still refuse to this day to provide a whole lot of critical information pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, railway investigation reports, or railway training programs, railway players, etc. Because, well, I think it's all just too incriminating in my humble opinion. Now, I hope that this is going to provide for rail workers, rail investors, rail customers, the public at large, a few very critical lessons. First of all, if you see something, if you see a derailment, I don't care who you are, if you see a derailment anywhere, don't assume rail carriers will report it to the proper authorities. Take a picture or a video if you can, and then turn it into a local news channel, as well as to rail regulators, or a national channel if you can, to document that this actually happened. If you're in the US, include local and national news agencies like Newsmax. CNN is not the place to go. Send it to Newsmax. Um, the National Transportation Safety Board, the Surface Transportation Board, the Federal Railway Administration, and the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. If you're in Canada, send it to your local and national news. I would also say send it to Rebel News, because I really don't trust the national news like the CBC. The Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, and the Minister of Transportation. You must document these events. You can't assume that they're being referred to the proper authorities. And the other thing that I hope that this particular video has shown people is that I went to the CBC. I went to other news organizations also in Canada. Nobody wanted to touch these issues. I would hear from none of them. Or they didn't want to expose them. And that's clear. So when they say, people are so naive and they'll say, well, give it to the Fifth Estate or W5 or whatever. Well, I went to the CBC, the taxpayer funded arm of the government, which is supposed to be the agency that provides news to Canadians. Why aren't you doing your job, CBC? They're just a propaganda arm. There's no other way to put it. If it paints a bad picture for the current administration, boy, we're not going to put that out. We don't want to show that Transport Canada, the Transportation Safety Board, the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal, which I believe rolls up to the Minister of Justice, they're all rail partners in crime. Oh, we don't want to show that. The liabilities for the Government of Canada would be too massive. Well, CBC, what about your liabilities? I know the conservative movement in Canada wanted to defund the CBC. I'm all for that. They should not be getting $1 from taxpayers because clearly they are not there to inform or protect taxpayers. That's clear. So to all those of you who are naive in Canada and who think that corruption's only in the US, wake up. I hope that's the final lesson that you're going to get from all of these materials. Wake up and ask and demand accountability in these and so many other issues. As an MA in finance, it is my definite opinion that Canada is heading for a depression because nobody wants to invest here. And our politicians are so corrupt that they are busy hiding their scandals. How can you possibly have a proper negotiation for trade with the US when the government of Canada has been hiding these massive scandals impacting US national security and public safety in the US? And this is only one of three of them, folks. The government of the US has Canada by the throat. So as more and more people lose their jobs in Canada because Canada just can't seem to negotiate a good trade deal. Well, as auto workers are losing their jobs and steel workers and farmers and whatever, look no further than your corrupt government. I gave the government of Canada 9 years to address the fake qualifications and death cover-up issues. Death cover-up since 2018, so that's 7 years. The other scandals, one of them is so massive, I gave them 15 years, all swept under the carpet by Canadian politicians. So, you know what? I draw the line at death cover-ups, folks, and the financial fraud, they have had more than enough time. So if it's going to take hard economic times for Canadians to wake up to all these issues and a whole lot more, you know what? If it's sell out to China, sell out to the EU, whatever, by the Liberal government of Canada, well, I'm here to tell you, I'm all for 51st state. Canada will do far better under a U.S. administration than under the corrupt politicians it currently has. And folks, the other thing you need to realize, it's not just current politicians, it's a lot of our past politicians. And I don't care what color they wear. Liberal, conservative, NDP, Green, whatever. In my opinion, corruption abounds, currently and in the past. And so, you know, that's all I'm going to say on that one. Canadians need to wake up. And don't shoot the messenger, because I'm just the messenger in all of this. I gave them more than enough time to address these issues. And when I see players become more and more powerful and now infest the U.S. rail industry like they have, putting the lives of all Americans and frontline rail workers in the U.S. at risk because Canada failed to do its job, because it chose to be a rail partner in crime. Well, I may be born in Canada, but I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen. I've lived in both countries, experienced both economies. And I'm here to tell you, based on what I know, Canadians will be far better off being the 51st state. And to those of you who just hate to hear that, well, too bad. You don't know what I know. So, and I'll tell you one more thing. Proud Canadian with no jobs, no economy, no investment in this country, that's going to get old real fast. So I guess pick how much pain you're willing to put up with would be what I'd tell you as Canadians. Because in my opinion, there's a heck of a lot more pain coming for Canada because of its corrupt politicians. And yeah, I would definitely include Mark Carney in that. He has been behind the scenes as a Trudeau advisor for years. And I just don't believe that he didn't know about some of these issues, this scandal and others. Not with his buddy Chrystia Freeland being made Minister of Transportation. And again, those two, the current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and Chrystia Freeland, they're extremely close. He is her son's godfather. They both are big players for the World Economic Forum. She used to sit on the board. I don't know if she still does, but he's a big-time globalist. And so, like I said, folks, there's a reason Chrystia Freeland is Minister of Transportation under Mark Carney. And again, to anybody watching these videos, don't assume that because a player may appear to be Canadian only, that it doesn't impact the U.S. because materials, because of the players that move from one company to another, one country to another, you should again be watching all videos on both YouTube channels, Rail Families United and the UPNS Merger YouTube channel, which I've also put together. So that's going to end this video. Have a great day, and I will see you on the next one.